We usually want the main light to come from slightly above the subject's face. Remember, we're looking for that 10 or 2 o'clock lighting position. As I mentioned earlier in the program, there are many light patterns that can flatter a face. But the most popular one happens when the light comes from above and in front of the face. This holds true no matter what direction the face is facing. If the head is tilted toward the light, your light will need to be physically lower. If the subject's head is tilted away from the light has to be higher. Even if the person is upside down, the light still needs to come from that same direction relative to the face. Let's start this with showing how to get your light low enough for proper portrait lighting. The light stands we use on location aren't really designed for positioning lights very low. So we have to improvise a bracket or a clamp to attach the light lower on the light stand. Or we can use the boom arm light stand for that. It works great when our subject's on the ground or when your subject is a kid. Catch lights aren't the main reason for proper light placement, but they are a good indicator of it. For a senior sitting on the ground, we'll want the light to be lower. The result is the right height for a proper light placement for a nice yearbook photo. The catch light at the 10 o'clock position confirms this. Once you've found the right height for the light, if you need to move it farther away, you also need to raise it. If the subject's head is tilted away from the main light, it needs to be higher. Even though this light is higher than the subject's head, it's not high enough here because of her head tilt. It had to be much higher for better facial modeling to look her best. It's also important to know that the softness of your light will affect how easily we see the problem. If you're using a large softbox relatively close, the subject won't look as bad as if she were lit by a small light. But the problem will still be there. So it's good to know the fundamentals of light placement. And just for reference, here's how she looked without adding our main flash. If there's an interesting sky, I'll get down low to only see that sky and not the surrounding scene. But when I do that, the person has to bend over toward me so their body is perpendicular to the camera. Otherwise, the lower part of their torso will appear larger than they'd like. I'm using a wide-angle lens, and being this close to the person makes anything that's even closer to the camera appear quite large. In this case, the skirt looks wide because of that perspective, and I like that. The next important consideration is light placement. We normally place a light higher than the person. I tried having her tilt her head up, but that just looks stupid. The better option is to lower the light. The result from that is a much better image. The light is still high, but sometimes I like that dramatic effect. This is really as high as it needs to be when I'm on the ground and the person is bent over toward me. And we get this result. So to summarize, we have to remember that light placement is relative to the facial angle. If the head's down, the light needs to come down. You can't use a light at ground level to make this one work. I raised it up for the 10 o'clock position. Normally, I don't want a high top light, but sometimes we can do it wrong on purpose. I'll use the boom arm light stand for that. A high 12 o'clock light position can be very interesting, as long as it looks deliberate. By putting that softbox overhead with a boom arm, we get an interesting mood. But be aware that unless you want raccoon eyes for a special effect, the subject needs to tilt his or her head up to the light. Here's one where I wanted the raccoon eyes look deliberately. By the way, guys in rock bands can look really good this way. I deliberately used a high light for no light in his eyes for a spooky effect. Sometimes you can make successful images with various light heights. I started here for a deliberately high light effect. Then I brought the light down where I knew it would work for sure. Then I used a low light for a ghoulish kind of style. And I think all three light positions work. I did this when I was shooting for senior portrait artists in California. Since I was traveling, I didn't have a softbox, so I was forced to use a small flash unit. Although it worked nicely, I'm not always fond of the hard shadows that a small light source causes. So I bounced the light from the flash off the sand in front of her. That not only gave me a more dramatic light pattern, it also gave me a softer light without any visible shadows. But when the water was rushing over the sand, we ended up with rippled light on her, which I don't like. You might be wondering about the difference in light direction from a fuzzy flector, which is best used on the ground, and a softbox on a light stand. While the light here isn't bad, I think the facial lighting could be improved if the light came from a higher direction. Using a softbox on a stand places the light in a more expected and pleasing position. I know the differences are subtle, but it's the accumulation of subtle improvements that make a big difference in your work versus those who can't see or don't care about those subtleties. A common practice is to place the main light as close to the subject as possible without seeing it in the image. I do that when I want the softest light from my softbox. But let's also look at the fall off of light along a full-length pose and discuss those results. This is typically where I'll place my light. Because I'm using a relatively weak speed light in the softbox, I can't get more than about 10 feet away and still maintain my f4 at 100 ISO results. But later in the evening when the ambient light is low, I do have the option to move my light farther back. Why should we do that? Placing the light close to the subject, we get a subtle, natural, top-to-bottom fall-off in intensity from the main light. Notice that her face is lighter than her legs. That's because the flash is quite a bit closer to her face than to her legs. Moving the light farther away, her legs will appear brighter. That's because her face and legs are now about the same distance from the flash. They're also very slightly warmer because they're lit with the flash instead of the blue sky. I did have a quarter CTB color temperature blue gel on the flash to match the sky color temperature, but this was late in the evening when the sky is very blue. Anyway, the differences between a near and far light aren't dramatic, but it's something we should be aware of. If I were working alone, I'd have used the light stand, but in this case we were shooting at a school, so I had Shirley with me. If you work with an assistant or a parent, they can save you some time from having to set up the flash on a light stand. In the next images, I'll show that it's not only the light direction, but also the intensity that creates the mood. I started with this shot without flash. If I'm going for a high-key beach look, it's okay, but that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to add flash to get a more dramatic look. Adding flash equal to the ambient light added a bit of style, but not enough. So I kept the flash at the same exposure since it was properly exposing her. But then I switched to manual exposure on the camera and increased the shutter speed. That left the flash area lit properly, but darkened anything not illuminated by the flash, giving me a dramatic look that I was after. Then in Photoshop I turned it to black and white with a hint of brown to complete the 40s look that I wanted.
Fine, okay, we got that. Okay, good. Okay, that was nice. Okay, blanket. So what I did was the first one, the flash didn't go off. Okay, but now the flash went off, so now we're starting to evolve the pose. Just to darken the background just a little bit more. Okay. What I'm going to do is, I'm happy with that. I just in the interest of not killing her just yet, Liz, I think I'm really happy with that. I just showed you that last one. Okay. It looks a little cool in the screen, on the screen here. In the raw capture, I'm going to warm that up a little bit. Okay.
Too bad you can't do that.
You know what? Let's just do one more. Let's just.
One of the beauties of flash is that it can turn an ordinary scene into something much more dramatic. I started with spotlighting her with the flash, and the camera was at a 1/250th of a second, but I felt that was too harsh and lacking background. An easy way to find the right shutter speed when you want a rich sky is to take a meter reading on the sky. With my aperture set for the flash at f8, I simply pointed the camera at the sky, and the shutter speed indicated 1/90th of a second. So I changed the shutter speed to a 90th of a second, and it brought the background back just enough. Another benefit of using flash is the ease of controlling the background. This image has no flash. This time with flash, you can set the shutter speed to give you a rich look like this. Or you can shorten the shutter speed for a more dramatic look. All this can be done in a few seconds by simply changing the shutter speed. Working in sunlight has its challenges. One of the risks in using hard sunlight is that the images can look amateurish, as I think this one does. One of the more basic and easy to follow rules in portrait photography is to keep the subjects back to the sun. I did that here, but I also found a place where the sun was diffused through a tree for her hair. Then it was just a simple matter of adding a main light with flash, as you can see it on the far right. This is generally a safer and a better lighting solution to working in sunlight than the first one that I showed. When it's really windy, you can't use big light modifiers that are essentially sails, and the wind will blow them away. So you have to use small lights. It was extremely windy this day, and I didn't want to risk a large light catching the wind and blowing over, even though the light stand was staked down. so I had to use a small flash. But notice here that the light is on the opposite side as the wind. That can cause problems for people with long hair. So I placed the light stand with the small flash on the wind side so her hair would blow away from her face when she turns her face into the wind. And in case you didn't think we needed flash, this was a comparison without and with flash. I looked for examples of wind with my high school seniors, and almost every one of them had the main light on the same side as where the wind is coming from. So when is it better to shoot in manual flash mode? When faced with unusual or contrasty lighting, and especially if you want to be in control of the background density, you might prefer to set everything manually. To get the effect I wanted for the next image, I started by setting the shutter speed for the look of the sky that I wanted. Then I placed the softbox flash where I wanted it, and adjusted the flash power to give me the proper exposure on her. I usually have excellent results with TTL flash, but other photographers haven't had quite as reliable results with other brands of flashes and cameras. By the way, I didn't like that red dress that she was wearing, so she changed into a more appropriate top for the clouds. Because of the physics of light, the closer the light is to the subject, the less room there is for error. TTL flash would have probably worked here, but because the sun was in the sky, although it was behind him, I chose manual. However, with this type of shot, he had to bend way over to the camera, and with the flashes very close, they have very little depth of light. So a little movement in his position back or forth causes under or overexposure. In fact, I did overexpose him, and I had to fix it. Shooting into the sun is a popular thing for a dramatic image. You'll need a very powerful flash if you're shooting in the middle of the day, and especially if you use it in a softbox for a soft light. But I usually don't start shooting until later in the day and into the evening. So I'll show you how to do it with a small hot shoot type flash. This shows the relative brightness that I was working in. The lights are positioned as close to the subject as possible without seeing them in the photo. I removed the front baffles on the softbox so I could get the maximum power from that flash. The other light stand holds another speed light to light the hoop and the backboard. This shows the same scene, but with the result of shooting at a high shutter sync speed and a small f-stop. And the portrait image that I made with those settings. Both she and the basketball hoop are lit well with those two speed lights. And of course, when you go through the trouble of setting this up, you need to do some posing variations. So how do you go about setting up your camera and your speed light to achieve this? Well, first you need to set your flash to its highest power output. Keep in mind that you might also want to use the zoom head on your flash to focus the light to get more light in a small area. I set my Canon 580 to 70 millimeters here. Next, set your camera to its highest shutter sync speed, which will either be a 200th or a 250th. Then, set your camera to its smallest f-stop opening. The final step is to match the flash's output to your f-stop by moving the flash forward or backward to get the right exposure. But the only way to get sun and soft light is with a more powerful strobe and a large light modifier. I'll talk more about soft light and powerful strobes later.